Welcome to the Anti-Noise Experience, podcast, endurance, noise, and random musings. I wanted to talk to you today about drinking. Runners should trust their thirst, says a new study. And it's kind of interesting how they keep going back and forth on this. But it says not only does your brain sense when you're dehydrated, it monitors what you drink and eat and adjusts your thirst immediately. So all those plans and stuff don't seem to really matter. Just go by your gut feeling or go by what your body says and you'll be okay. It's basically what this article says. It says if you ever run a marathon, half marathon, or any other long distance, you've undoubtedly had a hydration plan, a detailed assessment of what you intend to drink, when you intend to drink it, and how to intend to obtain it. But a paper released recently in current issue of Science says you may just be able to trust your sense of thirst to tell you when you are and aren't getting enough fluids. Not all that long ago, runners were told to. Thirst was a slow reflex that lagged but well behind the body's actual needs. It actually appears to be exquisitely sensitive, integrating the amount of information in real time, says this Professor Zimmerman, a neuroscientist at Princeton University, who just put out this, won a Science Magazine 2020 prize for his work in this field. And, I found this out a long time ago. Way back, I started running in 1979, and I ran a marathon in 1980. So I started running my sophomore year in high school, ran a marathon the following year in Bakersfield Marathon. And interesting, back then, we didn't have sports drinks and drinking and all this stuff. Cross country, it's hot in Bakersfield, it's in the hundreds today. Again, unfortunately, almost 100. We would run from garden hose to garden hose occasionally, and we would drink when we were thirsty, but we didn't carry water bottles and hydration packs and all this kind of stuff that we do today. And the big problem was, I was training for my marathon, didn't know a lot about it because, there wasn't the internet. I would have to go to the library and find books or have books sent to me and, get magazine subscriptions. Fortunately, the late 70s was a big running boom and the Americans were pretty good at it. You had Bill Rogers, Frank Shorter, and alike all winning and running really well in races. Not like today where the American men especially are just not up to snuff. We're so far behind the rest of the world. But so anyways, I trained for the marathon and then, went to the marathon. It was a Bakersfield Marathon. It was a big 13-mile loop out here, basically 4 miles this way, 4 miles this way, 4 miles this way, 4 miles this way. And they had it in February, so it was cold and foggy, which was good. So you couldn't really see what you're doing or going. And, and I was on sub 3-hour pace. I was probably running 250 pace, 630 pace. But we had an aid station probably every 2 miles, and they're always telling you, oh, you got to drink. So I'm drinking, and something I didn't do in training, so it was kind of dumb. And then around 20 miles, my legs didn't give out. I mean, my stomach started sloshing around. You could feel it, and I basically later on found out I basically got waterlogged. And it was because I didn't drink in training and I drank too much in the race. I didn't really need to worry about getting dehydrated in February when it's nice and cold. And so I had stomach issues. Unfortunately, that first marathon, I fell apart at the end. It took me almost an hour to do the last 6 miles, and I ran in 3:01, which is really disturbing. And then the following year, since back then there weren't that many races, plus I was in high school, I ended up running it again, had the same kind of stomach issues, 3:03. Then fortunately, I went to Lompoc Marathon with a bunch of veteran runners here in Bakersfield, and it was a hot, warm day, June. They had a Lompoc Valley of the Flowers race, and I remember hitting about 18, 19 miles and someone saying 10th, and I can't remember exactly where I got, but I got top 10, ran 255, and didn't have any issues, but I didn't drink in that race, and I don't know why I didn't drink, but I kind of figured it out. And then, unfortunately, my fastest marathon I ever ran was 2:20, and I had issues there where maybe 15, 16 miles in the race, I had to go to the bathroom, and I was running with the lead woman, and thankfully, we were in this neighborhood residential area. I was like, what am I going to do? And then just out of the blue, there was a porta potty, and out of the blue, and I had to go in there and take care of business and got back out and ran my fastest marathon. But, you do all these races and, there's constantly talking about drinking. And if you do the research, it's shown that getting dehydrated isn't that big a deal. You get slightly dehydrated. Some of the world-class guys lose quite a bit of fluid, but they just go running faster because you basically getting lighter and lighter. And that most of the deaths in marathoning come from getting waterlogged. You get dehydrated, it's dramatic, you collapse on the ground, but you don't die. They come up to you and they, take care of you, give you some fluids, maybe give you an IV, and you're okay. Problem is when you drink too much water and your balance gets off, you're like a battery, and if you get those electrolytes wrong, the muscles just won't fire, and you'll have a heart attack or something of that sort. So this article is interesting. It says what makes it interesting is that what was located outside the blood barrier is what's taking control of it. It says researchers realized the sense of thirst was regulated by a tiny part of the brain called the subfornical organ, SFO, about the size of a grain of sand, buried deep within the brain. But its membrane separates the blood from the bloodstream. So being outside the barrier allowed it to monitor the blood for important changes related to hydration, such as osmolarity or salt and protein content of the blood. If osmolarity goes up, you lose fluid, you need to replace it. If it's low, you've had enough and don't need to drink anymore. And so it's pretty amazing that this tiny little thing is taking care of you. And it says just as surgical patients are often told not to get behind on their pain meds, runners were told not to get behind on hydration. Under that theory, by the time they realized they were thirsty, it was too late. And this research basically throws a cold bucket of that on the notion of that. And they work with mice, and because mice are very similar to us, and they basically figured out that the SFO didn't just react to osmolarity of the blood; it anticipated it. When thirsty mice were allowed to drink, which my laboratory mice do by licking water from a tube, their SFOs immediately turned down their thirst signals. It's like these neurons are counting how much water the animals consume and are using it to find when to start and when to stop, Zimmerman told Podium Runner. A possible explanation for why salty foods makes you thirsty long before the salt has entered the bloodstream. So it's basically saying what we've kind of always known. It says, cold water. It says it feels better when I'm thirsty and it quenches the thirst faster. So they also believe that swallowing has a play into it. And they said that cold water may also work because cold water absorbs more rapidly from the gut. So it's possible that SFO knows that and accounts for it. And that's definitely the case. I know when I'm doing races and you got your handhelds and that water gets warm, you just don't want to drink it. And I think it's because you drink it and it just just popped in my head, it just gets in your stomach and kind of sloshes around. So if you can't get something cold to drink, you might as well maybe pass on drinking unless you're really, really thirsty, and then you should drink because you should obey your thirst. But if possible, try and get something cold. That's why when I travel to races, I always bring two things on the plane, and actually I make sure they're on the plane. I have my running gear, and I always make sure I have my running shoes, so if my plane and my luggage get separated, in fact, I try to do carry-on only. Sometimes when you go to these big races, you can't. But so what I do is I bring my Arctic cooler bag, which holds, a dozen drinks, and I bring that onto the plane. It's padded and it keeps things ice cold. It's a cheaper version of a Yeti. And what I do usually is I put my running shoes in that because then they fit pretty good, and then I don't have to worry about my running shoes getting beat up because it's heavily padded, and I make sure I bring that on the plane. So when I get to a race, I have the two things I need: my shoes and my cooler pack, so I can have my ice cold Diet Dr. Peppers. Is what I'm usually known for, but I'll take Diet Pepsis or Diet Cokes. I don't really want the sugar content; it makes me kind of sick. I just want the cold drink and getting the fluids in, and a little bit of caffeine helps. So it says here, when you sweat, our understanding is that the neurons of the SFO should know it and should be one of the signals that the cells get. So this little SFO, the size of a piece of rice, is controlling all of your thirst things and figuring out what you need to do. So this kind of goes hand in hand with Tim Noakes, who's a South African exercise physiology who wrote The Lore of Running, and he says that dehydration is a bugaboo many people have long claimed isn't the bugaboo. He says Noakes argues that our distant ancestors evolved to run long distances during the day, slowly dehydrating as they chase game over the African savannas. Then they'd rehydrate at night after they'd run their quarry to the ground. Same genes, Noakes has argued, mean that you do not need to remain fully hydrated during a long run. Rather, he says you can go to a large extent, trust your sense of thirst. And it says, if you feel thirsty, you definitely need a drink. So Tim Noakes' work is that his advice for runners is that we should drink when they are thirsty. And that's kind of the plan. You see all these people with these little elaborate plans of drinking and eating and stuff like that. And I think you've just got to kind of trust yourself. And one of the ways you can trust yourself is by training for the events. Too many people, as I've said before, train for their event, but they don't really do it in the conditions they're going to race in. So, if you're a high school cross country runner, your big races are often in the afternoons early in the season, but then later in the season, you're often running in the mornings. So you need to adjust your training for that and for the type of weather. If you're an ultra runner, you're going to be out there night and day, and you need to work on training during the night and day. And so don't just go out running at 5 in the morning, because that's when you can get away with from your family or work and commitments. You've got to train and figure out what you need and drink by thirst, not have some formula like so many people kind of say you should do. So, interesting article. It'll be in the show notes. And as always, stay healthy,